Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead, and it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. And I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. And I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy. Tonight I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. To take on Moses in his promised land. On April 3rd, 1968, Martin Luther King gave his last speech at the Mason Temple Church of God in Christ headquarters in Memphis, Tennessee. The next day he was assassinated by the government. What did Martin Luther King think was worthy of dying over? He was protesting the unsafe, unsanitary conditions of the garbage workers. The garbage workers were striking, wanting better pay, and he was in favor of unions. You know who's against unions? Donald Trump, right? Corporate fascist, and Adolf Hitler. They don't want, oppressors do not want the slaves to gather together in order to topple their main oppressive, slave-driving, dictating, fascist, monarchist, fucking dick, piece of shit, low life, no good, dirty, rotten. Somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of the press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest for rights. And so just as I said, we aren't going to let dogs or water hoses turn us around. We aren't going to let any injunction turn us around. We are going on. Go out and tell your neighbors not to buy Coca-Cola in Memphis. Go buy and tell them not to buy Seal Test milk. Tell them not to buy, what is the other bread? Wonder Bread? And what is the other bread company, Jesse? Tell them not to buy Hart's Bread. As Jesse Jackson has said, up to now, only the garbage men have been feeling pain. Now we must kind of redistribute the pain. Third is also Happy Cell Phone Day. So the first handheld mobile phone call was made by Martin Cooper of Motorola to Joel S. Engel of Bell Labs in 1973, April 3rd, 1973. That's when Martin Cooper, a Motorola researcher and executive, made the first mobile telephone call from a handheld subscriber equipment, placing the call to Dr. Joel S. Engel of Bell Labs. The prototype handheld phone used by Dr. Cooper weighed 1.1 kilograms, measured 23 centimeters long. Martin Cooper of Motorola called Joel S. Engel of Bell Labs because that was his competitor. So Martin Cooper of Motorola was actually rubbing his success in Joel S. Engel of Bell Labs' face. Take that. I figured out how to make a wireless phone call before you motherfucking low-life son of a bitch. Cooper and the engineers at Motorola installed the first cellular transmitter atop the Burlington Consolidated Tower. It's later renamed the Alliance Capitol Building on 6th Avenue. And then that was the tower that they used to make their first cell phone call. I must study politics and war, that my sons may have the liberty to study mathematics and philosophy, natural history, and naval architecture in order to give their children a right to study painting, poetry, music, architecture, tapestry, and porcelain. I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked, dragging themselves through the Negro streets at dawn looking for an angry fix. Angel-headed hipsters burning for the ancient heavenly connection to the starry dynamo in the machinery of night, who poverty and tatters and hollow-eyed and high sat up smoking in the supernatural darkness of cold water flats floating across the tops of cities contemplating jazz, who bared their brains to heaven under the L and saw Mohammedan angels staggering on tenement roofs illuminated, who passed through universities with radio. That is a poem called How, and it was written by Allen Ginsberg in 1955. And the historical note for today is that the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, decided to fight for the people who got arrested. It wasn't even Allen Ginsberg that got arrested. But in 1955, on April 3rd, the ACLU announced that it will defend Allen Ginsberg's book, How, against obscenity charges. What the charges, where it stemmed from, was essentially promotion of homosexuality. There was talks about drugs and other sexual practices, but specifically there was one line that said, "The people let themselves be fucked in the ass by saintly motorcyclists and screamed with joy." And that was the kick in the balls. That was the kick in the balls for the American society at that time. That they let themselves get fucked in the ass by saintly motorcyclists and they screamed with joy. There's a bunch of sodomy laws and there's a prudish society. So when he said that, screamed with joy, people would have thought it would have been pain, but he said it was joy. So the customs, they had seized 520 copies of the poem on March 25th, 1957. It was being imported from the printer in London. And then on June 3rd, Shig Marrero, the bookstore manager, was arrested and jailed for selling How and other poems to an undercover San Francisco police officer. And then City Lights publisher also was arrested for publishing the book. Once the bookstore manager was arrested, and then once the publisher was arrested, now you have an obscenity trial. And they had non-literary experts testify on the poem's behalf. The ACLU had fought the case, and eventually the California State Superior Court Judge Clayton decided that the poem was of redeeming social importance. There's also a 2010 movie called Howl, H-O-W-L, like you howl at the moon. Ow! Right? The Call of the Wild. James Franco plays Allen Ginsberg, and Andrew Rogers plays Ferlinghetti. Ferlinghetti was a City Lights publisher. So check out that movie. It's actually a pretty good movie. And the Habsburg Law number 3 was passed today also. The Habsburg Law number 3 was when the Austrian Parliament passed this law on April 3rd, 1919, permanently barring Charles I and Princess Zita of Bourbon-Parma, from returning back to Austria. Who is Charles and Zita? Well, they were the king and queen. Charles I, also known as the Blessed Charles of Austria, he takes over after his father had died, but the father was the one that had sunk the entire world into World War I. So whereas some people are like, that's mean, you shouldn't do that to them. Well, no, they absolutely should have. The dissolution of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire was one of the benefits of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. Was responsible for World War I. They were the ones that offered the ultimatum to the Serbs. They were the ones that wanted to conquer the Serbs. They were the ones who wanted vengeance and revenge. Even if they were pressured by the Russians or the Germans, it was the Austrians, the Austrian-Hungarians, King Franz Joseph the First. King Franz Joseph I was the one that had got Austrian-Hungarian into the war, and then it's a world war, and then everybody's dying because of this family. And then after the Charles Franz Joseph the First dies, then Charles the First of Austria becomes king. But not for long. He was ineffective, and they told King Charles and Zita of Bourbon-Parma, get the hell out of here. April 3rd, the German-Austrian Parliament, on the initiative of Chancellor Karl Renner, passed the Habsburg Law. Now, some people say, well, the son shouldn't pay for the father's crimes. it wasn't the father's crimes that he was paying for. It was his own crimes, right? He was carrying on the legacy of his father. So he was the king, and, also on April 3rd, the nobility was abolished. So the law on the abolition of nobility was also passed. So that's important, and Habsburg law was important too. So the abolition of nobility, no more nobles, nobody else is above anybody else. So that's good news, right? Happy abolition of the nobility day. Happy abolition of the nobility. Get out of here, nobility. Now get. April 3rd, 1948, Harry Truman signs the Marshall Plan to help rebuild the war-torn Europe. This would be after World War II. In 1865, the Union forces occupy Richmond, the capital of the Confederacy, and Petersburg, to the tune of Dixie. I wish I was in Dixie, away, away. In Dixieland, I'll take my chance to live and die in Dixie, away, away. So they take over Richmond, the capital of the Confederacy, to their own tune, to their own anthem. And in a way, it was kind of like Yankee Doodle, right? The British were making fun of the Americans with Yankee Doodle, and then all of a sudden it was like, fuck it, we'll accept that. We are Yankee Doodles. We do stick feathers in our cap. That's what we do. As Americans, we stick a feather in our cap, and we call it macaroni. That's just what we do. Also, April 3rd, 1966, the Unabomber Theodore Kaczynski is captured at his Montana cabin. So that happened. And April 3rd, 1559, so this is a while ago, 1559, the Treaty of Les Cateaux Cambrensis ends the Franco-Spanish-Italian Wars, which had lasted for about 60 to 70 years. Philip II of Spain and Henry II of France signed the Peace of Cateaux Cambrensis, ending a long series of wars between the Habsburgs and the Valois dynasties. So there's the Habsburgs again, right? But this time in 2007, April 3rd, you had the conventional train record speed record. A French TGV train on the LGV EST, the high-speed line, sets a new official world speed record. In 2000, in the Supreme Court case, the United States versus Microsoft Corporation, Microsoft is ruled to have violated the United States antitrust law by keeping an oppressive thumb on its competitors. So there was an antitrust suit that was filed that was won, that called Microsoft a monopoly, and that was on 2000, on April 3rd, 2000. The Panama Papers was released 1 year ago on this day. The Panama Papers, thank John Doe. John Doe is the one who actually released the Panama Papers. Panama hates that name. They would rather the Panama Papers be named after the company that they're all talking about, which is Mossack Fonseca. So Panamanian officials call this the Mossack Fonseca Papers. So the Mossack Fonseca Papers, because that was the shell company that was responsible for all these offshore entities. So the Panama Papers was released last year. It implicated a ton of people, including David Cameron and a lot of the Conservative Party. Uruguay arrested 5 people, charging them with money laundering through Mossack Fonseca shell companies for a Mexican drug cartel. So Uruguay has actually gone after some of these criminals. And then you also have about 12 current or former world leaders who were implicated, 128 other public officials and politicians, and hundreds of other members of the elites of over 200 countries. So David Cameron was on there, and the reason to have an offshore account, so you don't have to pay taxes. The leak was 2.6 terabytes of information, which is approximately 2,660 gigabytes. So compare that to the WikiLeaks Cablegate leak in 2010, 1.7 gigabytes. The offshore leaks in 2013, which is 260 gigabytes, to 2014 Lux leaks. 4 gigabytes and 3.3 gigabyte Swiss leaks of 2015. So by comparison, the Panama Papers were all those leaks combined and then some. So this was a ton of information that the press and the media did such a good job combing through and telling us exactly what had happened. Now, I'm impressed with all these leaks. If you're a Kentucky Anonymous kind of leaker, you go after the crimes, to go after the bad guys. If you're doing that, then I'm very much in favor of that kind. In favor of Anonymous. I'm in favor of Anonymous when they take down the people that needs to be taken down. So John Doe, I don't know who you are, but John Doe is the hero of the Panama Papers, or the Mossack Fonseca Papers, right? The Mossack Fonseca. And that's actually kind of fun to say, right? Mossack Fonseca. Mossack Fonseca. Mossack Fonseca. These offshore accounts, right? These rich people. This isn't for regular working class people. There ain't no regular working class people who's got offshore tax havens. These are the elite. These are the 1%. So the journalist Bastian Obermeier from the German newspapers Süddeutsche Zeitung, he said that John Doe wants to remain anonymous, even to the journalists in the investigation. I believe the Mossack Fonseca Papers is probably more precise. And, you know, what does the guy do at Panama? Like, I guess the company's in Panama, but it's also in other countries too. So the Mossack Fonseca Papers would be more accurate. Unfortunately, I think Panama Papers is going to stick. John Doe said, "My life is in danger." And in a May 6th statement, John Doe cited income inequality for his action. He said, "Simply because I understood enough about the contents to realize the scale of the injustices they described." He's never worked for any government or intelligence agency, and he was willing to help prosecutors if he was immune to prosecution. So just because he was a good man for income inequality, right? These aren't poor people who's using these tax havens, these offshore accounts. It's the rich. And I don't know if he made John Doe's a hero. John Doe, who leaked the Mossack Fonseca Papers, is a hero. In 1944, April 3rd, the Supreme Court says that black people can vote in the primaries too. So that was a good thing on April 3rd. 1981, the Osborne won. In 1981, the Osborne won. Osborne 1 is the first successful portable computer, and it's unveiled at the West Coast Computer Fair in San Francisco. Mount McKinley was climbed in 1910, April 3rd. The highest mountain in North America is Mount McKinley in Alaska, and it was climbed 107 years ago, in 1910, April 3rd. 1982, the UN Security Council demands Argentina to withdraw from the full. April 3rd, 1862, slavery was abolished in Washington, D.C. So, like how the legalization of marijuana is already in Washington, D.C., slavery was abolished in Washington, D.C., 1862, which was a precursor to the Emancipation Proclamation. In 1860, April 3rd, the Pony Express begins. They had to travel 2,000 miles, and they said that they could do it in 10 days from Missouri to California. Overall, the Pony Express only lasted 9 months, but its legacy carries on. It carried the popular imagination. William Buffalo Bill Cody signed on the Pony Express at the age of 14. The United Nations Security Council demands Argentina to withdraw from the Falkland Islands, 1982, April 3rd. This is when, O'Reilly was fighting his happy big fat pothead day. Roland A. Doobie, a.k.a. Marijuana Man, a.k.a. Ronnie Lee Smith, a.k.a. Big Fat Pothead, a.k.a. Thor, had died today. So I want to honor and celebrate Ronnie Lee Smith's life today, because I don't think too many people will. The last thing I want to mention, in 1968, April 3rd, the premiere of the 2001 Space Odyssey happened. And the song at the very end is a very heartbreaking song. Anytime I have a heartbreak, I always think of the song when the computer is singing Daisy. Daisy, Daisy, Give me your answer true. I'm half crazy, all for the love of you. Absence diminishes mediocre passions, and it increases great ones, as the wind extinguishes candles and fans fires. Was the first successful portable controller in, God damn it,